First thing I wanted to cover was today was that apparently it wasn't really spelled out. A lot of people didn't know it, but the vacancy hearing that was scheduled for this morning at 10 o'clock has been postponed. I'm going to read a statement here from P.J. Jennings. It said, in light of the ruling rendered by Woodbury County Auditor Pat Gill on today's date, said ruling stated that Jeremy Taylor is not a registered voter of 3215 Grandview Boulevard, Sioux City, Iowa. Mr. Taylor has requested the vacancy hearing to be continued at this time. As such, a hearing set for Monday will be continued indefinitely, which will allow Mr. Taylor the opportunity to appeal Pat Gill's ruling. Further notice will be provided as necessary. So that hearing has been postponed. And I want to make it clear that we were operating all the time from two separate sections, two separate chapters of the Iowa Code. 48A, which deals with voter registration, and Chapter 69, which deals just with the vacancy hearing. So the vacancy hearing has been postponed, but it will occur at some point because we've been petitioned for it. Mr. Jennings just as a courtesy to Supervisor Taylor, postpone that so that because the ruling, the appeal will affect what is presented at that hearing. So that's why Mr. Jennings postponed that hearing. Now, Mr. Taylor had a press conference on Friday, and all you folks were here, and after that hearing was over, you came to my office, and I didn't really know what had occurred, and I said I wasn't going to comment on it at that time. I just wanted, so I took the weekend to listen to that press conference, and it was on it's still listed on one of the local news television stations. It's on the website, the entire press conference. So I listened to that over and over, and the first thing I was struck by was the personal attack that was leveled against me. I was struck by the irony when Mr. Taylor first came to the Board of Supervisors. He insisted on having bylaws drafted that really, it goes to the Board of Supervisors meeting, but I just want to, one of the things that he insisted on putting in there was that board members and other elected officials should confine their remarks to the question before the board and shall be respectful of other elected officials and avoid referencing or questioning the motives of another elected official. That's something that I've always heard and held near and dear to myself, and that's the way that I deal with things. Always have. I wouldn't have been elected to the 6 terms as the county auditor if people felt that I was a partisan guy. I don't. I operate that office as nonpartisan as I can, and I've been complimented by Democrats and Republicans throughout the years that that's the way that I've operated. So I picked out some of the terms, and I'll establish the ground rules for today is that I'm not going to reference the hearing that took place or my decision. We're not going to discuss anything that happened during that hearing. So, but I went through and picked out, listened to the things that I thought I could talk to from Mr. Taylor's press conference. He said the auditor single-handedly overturned an election. I'm going to appeal this decision. And I welcome the review of that because when I went through to make this decision, is that there's no case law on a hearing of this type. So there's no case law, and so we had to rely on just what the code section said and the evidence that was presented at that hearing. And so I welcome Mr. Taylor exercising his right to appeal this decision because I'm not a judge. I'm not an attorney. Don't play one on TV. But I think that that's important because in going forward, when you're looking at Chapter 48A, I think auditors that are put in this position should have some sort of guidance to deal with besides what was just written in the code. Mr. Taylor went on to say, that it was one elected official overturned this election. And It's not me, it's on him. It was his actions that he chose to go out and purchase a home on the other side of town, outside of the district that he currently resides in. Another statement that was made. It is disappointing that the auditor scheduled this voter registration challenge first, and by doing so becomes a sole entity and decider rather than waiting for the vacancy challenge wherein the county attorney, county treasurer, and county auditor are actually to decide this issue. Upon receiving the challenge, I worked with Mr. Phillips to make sure I was in compliance with the law, and I contacted Mr. Taylor to accommodate his schedule and still be within the parameters established within the code. Mr. Jennings assumed the responsibility to schedule the vacancy hearing, which it was complicated because he had publication requirements. The section of the code that I dealt with does not have publication requirements. So I contacted Mr. Taylor and scheduled this hearing based on the information that Mr. Taylor gave me that he was available to. In the notice that I sent to Mr. Taylor, I advised him to contact me if he had a conflict and offered to reschedule if necessary. I was not notified of any concerns that Mr. Taylor had. This is the letter that I sent to Mr. Taylor, and the last paragraph said, "If you wish to appear in person or are unable to do so on the date scheduled, please let me know so that I may reschedule the hearing." I never heard anything back from Mr. Taylor after I sent him the notice. Okay? And when you deal with, here's what 48A says what I have to do when I receive a challenge. Within 5 working days, notify the challenge registrant and the challenger of the date, time, and place of the hearing on the matter of the challenge to be held not less than 20 nor more than 30 days from the commissioner's receipt of the challenge. And then it goes on to, it says that the challenge registrant wishes to appear. I have to notify him that. If the person is unable to do so on the date scheduled, the commissioner may reschedule the hearing. I gave him that option. He could do that. When you look at what PJ had to deal with, it says the notice shall include a place of time and hearing, the name of the office holder, and whose status is in question. The public hearing shall be held less than not 4 nor more 14 days after the publication of the notice. PJ had to deal with publication and notices. And I passed on to PJ the availability when I talked to Mr. Taylor, when he was available. And so he said he went off on a separate track. There was no collusion, nothing like that took place during that period of time. I met my responsibility as far as setting the hearing. I notified Mr. Taylor that if he had any conflict, that he could contact me and we could reschedule. I heard nothing from Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor's comment was, "I believe from the beginning that, and this has been a partisan witch hunt. I say this because you look at what was filed by Maria Runquist, which was not allowed to read and was not allowed to be read into the record. Ms. Runquist's letter was part of the original challenge, and it's a public record. And that's how Mr. Taylor got it, because I gave him a copy of what was presented in the challenge. I had previously, Maria Runquist called me and asked me about the hearing and how it was going to take place. And I told her that this letter was not relevant to the voter registration hearing and would not be allowed to be considered, because it dealt with just strictly the supervisor, had nothing to do with voter registration. Shortly before the hearing, Mr. Taylor asked when we were sitting up on the table, he asked Doug Phillips, who was assisting me in this, and asked if he could read this into the record. Mr. Phillips advised Mr. Taylor that it was not relevant to that hearing, and I agreed with him, and that's what I had previously told Ms. Runquist. It was not relevant to the hearing, so that's why it wasn't. It was a public record, it was released, Mr. Taylor got it, Anybody else could have got it. But it wasn't relevant to the hearing, and that's why it wasn't offered at the hearing. Then back in, the next statement was back in January of 2019. Pat Gill approached me and told me that while my only residence, the only residence of our family was on Grandview, that Democrats were worried and that we would not, and that we could not all be in such a home. This is true, and I have to work with all the Board of Supervisors, and I have in the past. I've offered them advice before, and sometimes they listen and sometimes they don't. But this is what I was giving him. I was giving Mr. Taylor a heads up that folks knew that he'd sold his house on Pierce Street and that they were living in the Grandview Boulevard residence. And I was giving him a heads up is that they were paying attention to what he was doing. There was no partisan conspiracy going on. It just told him is that, hey, they're watching what you're going to do, and gave him a heads up. That's simply what that was all about. Yet, Mr. Taylor went out and purchased a home on the other side of the district, or on the other side of town. And when you, this courthouse, it has ears. Anything that takes place in this courthouse, people know about it within hours. And as soon as Mr. Taylor filed a mortgage, it was well known, and it was made known to me that he did that. And I thought, why would you do that? Who does that? But he chose to do that. This is the other thing, and this is an opportunity. You know, this is something that wasn't relevant. Mr. Taylor brought it up at that press conference, but it is something that he tried to get the media to pick up on or to make a story about. And it has to do with Pat Gill spoke about the fact that he lived in South Sioux City, Nebraska, and told me that it had been signed off by the Secretary of State, something that is known in the courthouse and by other elected officials. This was another conversation that we had. It was an informal conversation. Mr. Taylor never asked for me or the county attorney to talk about, to give him a ruling on whether or not it was legal what he did. But I related to a story at the time about what had occurred to me. And this is hard to talk about, but for an extensive period of time, I stayed with my parents over in South Sioux as my mother suffered from Alzheimer's. And my dad asked me to come help him out. And there were on numerous occasions in the middle of the night that I went out and picked my mother up off the floor and put her back into bed with my dad. He asked me to do that. I related that conversation to Mr. Taylor. And I also talked about that we were talking about residency at the time. And I referred to him, I said that Board of Supervisors, because you have to understand the appointing entity for people in my position, the row officers are here, is that the Board of Supervisors are the appointing entity. And they were concerned, they'd heard the rumors, and I told them. And this is the code section that I appointed them to that allows for that type of situation. This is just voter registration. This is not about vacancy. It says a person does not lose their residence if the person leaves the person's home to reside temporarily in another state or precinct. They allow for that to happen. You don't lose your residence because you're helping somebody out. You're helping a family member out, that type of thing. So that's the conversation that we had at that point. We also talked about other things about other folks that may have done it in the past that have two different residences, but their residency wasn't ever challenged. Okay? And we talked about, and I talked to other supervisors about that. And at that point, I wasn't getting along real well with those Board of Supervisors. But when my mother passed, those Board of Supervisors came to my mother's rosary. And that really meant something to me, is that they They appreciated what I had gone through, and they appreciated the position that I was in. But they never said that there was a vacancy or that I had abandoned my duties or anything along those lines. The other one that said that this was a partisan effort, and intimated that I don't know, it wasn't clear to me, but it sounded like he had said that he'd asked for some sort of ruling from us. There was never any ruling from myself or the county attorney's office on whether it was legal what he was doing. And during that period of time that it became known that he got a mortgage, $480,000 mortgage, and the Democrats started talking about it because I'd given Mr. Taylor the warning that they were keeping track of it. But they decided, and they told me this, that they weren't going to petition for it. They weren't going to be involved in it because they just wanted to see what was going to happen. But they were also waiting to see what Mr. Taylor's intentions were as far as the filing period in March, what office he was going to run for. If he was going to run for Congress or if he was going to resign and run in Marty Potabom's district in I forget what district it is, but the house that Mr. Taylor and his spouse purchased is in Marty Potabom's district. So Woodbury County Democrats, their party, was not involved in this process at all. They were waiting to see what would happen. And then the article was published in the Journal about Mr. Taylor's residence. And at that time, it was organic. It wasn't something that was put together by the Woodbury County Democrats. It wasn't something that I was involved in. What happened was that that article was published, and there were 5 different inquiries made of our office that how that petition process worked. And 3 out of the 5 that inquired were registered Republicans. 1 was not registered at all, and the 5th one was Maria Runquist, who is no party. That's hardly a partisan effort that took place. It was organic. I thought those were the folks that came together to petition for that. And I was getting pressure from people because the law allows for that appointing entity to call their own vacancy hearing on their own volition. I said, I'm not going to do that. The citizens have the ability to petition for that vacancy hearing. If they want to do it, they can do it. One of the things that happened was former Supervisor Larry Clausen paid me a visit and told me to do my damn job. And he wanted me to call for that hearing on our own. I said, Larry, I'm not going to do that. The citizens have to petition. Larry was upset because Larry Clausen faced a similar situation years ago. He had to resign his position, and he ran for the office and was elected in a different district. He felt that it was very unfair what Mr. Taylor was doing. I told him, go upstairs and see PJ. If you can get PJ convinced to do it, I'll do it. But there's an ability for citizens to petition of District 2. They did, and that's where we're at. Now, as far as where we're going, I talked about a little bit about the informed you that the vacancy hearing has been postponed. But one of the things that occurred is that as soon as I issued my decision, we canceled Mr. Taylor's registration. In Iowa Code Section 331-201 says a supervisor must be a registered voter of the county or supervisor district of the county which the supervisor represents. So at this point, Mr. Taylor is disqualified from being a supervisor at this point. He can, what I'm anticipating and what I told PJ, and PJ agreed, he said that for this I have to get a court order to reinstate Mr. Taylor's voter registration. It is canceled at this point, and he is disqualified from serving on the board. I could have waited and just surprised him on Tuesday and said that, but as soon as I heard that, I called Mr. Jennings, and he told me that he would call Mr. Taylor and do that too. And I also informed Supervisor Ung, the chairperson of the Board of Supervisors, to give him a heads up. So that's where we're at. I'm waiting for a court order to tell me to reinstate Mr. Taylor's voter registration. We're waiting for the appeal process to take place. That's what Mr. Jennings' intention is, as far as holding off on that, because it would affect the evidence that would be presented at that hearing. So that's a reasonable thing to do. And so, as far as the decision goes, I feel comfortable. I did the right thing. But the bottom line is, it wasn't about me. It was about Mr. Taylor's actions. So I'll answer any questions at this point. Oh, I do want to add one thing. I see Susan Stewart is here today, and we talked this morning. And since the question was asked about a vacancy, if the situation that we're in right now, if there was a vacancy occurred, then the appointing entity, which is myself, the county treasurer, and the county attorney, if we declare a vacancy, the option is up to us to decide whether or not we're going to appoint somebody. And if we were to appoint somebody, citizens would have the ability to petition that and ask for a special election. Or we can go right to the point and ask for a special election. And how that affects is, if we appointed somebody, then, and nobody petitioned for a special election, that seat would appear on the general election ballot in the fall, and it would be as to fill a vacancy. And we have that option if nobody petitioned for it. Or if you do a special election, then that person doesn't appear on the ballot again in this fall. It would be he would be sworn in to serve the remainder of the term, which is about 2.5 years, close to 3 years. And I assured Susan Stewart, who is the chairperson, right, Susan, of the chairperson of the Woodbury County, or the Woodbury County Republicans, and I assured her that if there was a vacancy declared, that my vote would be to have a special election, go right to a special election, and not appoint somebody. I think it's fair to do for the citizens to do that. But that was just in case the vacancy held, and the only reason to bring it up is because Susan and I discussed that this morning. Okay. All right, so now I'll answer questions.
So is the presumption is then there'll be a judge's decision today before we would get to a supervisor meeting tomorrow?
I don't know what's going to occur. I just know that that's what it takes for me. I have to have some sort of court order to reinstate his voter registration.
So if that doesn't happen before 4:30 tomorrow?
1 o'clock tomorrow.
Okay, before 1 o'clock tomorrow, then he can't sit in the meeting?
That's correct.
You mentioned before that, you kind of wish that these procedures were more ironed out in Idaho.
Absolutely.
What do you envision for that?
I don't know. I'm sure that after this is bandied about, that people are going to consider that. I don't like the position that I was put in. But it's strictly voter registration. It doesn't have to do with vacancy. It's intended to deal with voter registration. Qualifications for office are built off voter registration, but it's a different chapter. 48A deals strictly with voter registration. Any other questions?
For this to change, not that this would necessarily be a likely scenario, but for this to change to where he'd be on the board with no dispute, then would he have to potentially sell the Christie Roadhouse and move everyone back into the Grandview, or is?
Here's what voter registration, the only thing I'm going to say about that is voter registration says that it should be liberally construed, and a person should be able to register where they want. And that's what we want to do, is allow people to register. There's nothing at this point that prevent Mr. Taylor from registering at the address on 5202 Christie Road. He's able to do that. And we're not like saying you can't ever vote again. We're just saying that based on that hearing, his voter registration was canceled because it doesn't appear that is his residence, and we'll wait for the appeal process to take place.
And can you just clarify, you said his voter registration is canceled and he's disqualified from serving on the board, but that could change tomorrow, technically?
It depends on when the appeal is filed, and if I get some sort of order that says that to reinstate his voter registration or judicial. But
You just need to get it like 1 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Is that right?
well, that's when the next board meeting.
Oh, that's
It starts at 1 o'clock with budget hearing. Yeah, but I already read that from 331. That's why he's disqualified.
Has an appeal been filed yet?
I have no idea. We're waiting. I hope that honestly, I hope that it appears in our office and we can go from there.
Are you planning to run for office again this fall?
I am planning to run for office again this fall. Any other questions?
Are your remarks prepared, or I was just wondering if you had prepared
No,
remarks?
these are my notes.
All right.
Anything else? Thank you. Appreciate it.
So thank you for being here as well, and just want to make some follow-up remarks in response to the auditor. I'm thankful that code contemplates the time to go through the appeal process. This all happened as of Thursday afternoon, and I believe that the reason for the vacancy hearing is to have three separately elected officials decide this issue rather than a judge and jury of one. I appreciated the auditor's comments and where he's come from, as well as working with him in the past. I am consulting with legal counsel given the next steps and the appeal process so that we can have a fair hearing. And part of this is about making sure that it's completely understood why I did what I did with legal counsel in order to make sure that we fulfilled the residency requirements. I also want to make sure that some of the salacious accusations that have been out there are answered, including things like I lied to the VA, which is not true. I plan to demonstrate that all along concerning the lending process, I was upfront with what my intentions were. The reason that I've called this partisan that I asked for the comments that were filed along with the petition to be read is that I think that they speak to some of the motive and intention based on the petition, which included things like I am fueled by dark money and other things referencing my congressional candidacy. This has been very difficult on my family. I've been able to demonstrate through filed police reports and other methods just some of the animus that has been levied at us, as well as on social media. This is in no small part about clearing our name as well for those who would make accusations and would say that we're not doing exactly what we are as a family. I understand it's an atypical situation, but I am bothered by the fact that 5 of my neighbors within 100 feet were dismissed for evidence of someone who does not live on my block. So the preponderance of evidence, I think, is disconcerting. Talked to the head of the city water department, who confirmed that between 748 gallons and 1,496 gallons were used in those 4 months' time. At least 1 CCF, but no more than 2 CCF. So when it goes out into the media that I used no water, those aren't accurate statements. And so I plan to make sure that a judge can hear all the evidence. I asked Mr. Gill how this would be set up. He referenced some code sections. I realize the difficult position that he's put into. I went to Mr. Phillips, and he talked to me a little bit about the process. I did not realize that some of this evidence would be put forward when Bob Scott texted me and said that they had asked for my water utility bills, and I understood that this was not something that was allowable under FOIA. I didn't know that those would be readily available. Those were, and that's fine, and I can explain, as I have, my water usage and the fact that 13 to 25 gallons per time, based on talking to the head of the city water department, were used. But to invalidate someone's voter registration, there's a larger issue at play here, and that's that by doing so, it has effectively removed someone from the Board of Supervisors when a vacancy hearing that is designed to be 3 separately elected officials deciding this is what was to be in place. So I appreciate that I was asked for my personal availability and could give my times of military duty or other commitments, but that doesn't really speak to the issue at hand. So with that, I did want to establish the conversations that had been had, that I had sought with legal counsel in making this decision that was in the best interest of my family, as well as the timeline that we did have those conversations between the auditor and myself. So at this point, I'm exploring all the legal options, and you will know in the next day or two what some of my decisions are. I'll take any questions that you may have.
So as far as the appeal from last week's hearing, then, the county attorney's taking care of that? You didn't have to actually file anything on your own, or how?
My understanding, Woody, was that giving him a written statement of my intention to appeal would stay the effect of Pat's decision, and that I would remain on the Board of Supervisors. That's since changed. I was texted at church yesterday, and I gave PJ a call that until that legal action is actually taken, that I'm effectively removed from the Board of Supervisors by virtue of the auditor saying that I'm no longer a registered voter in the home in which I was elected to and reside the majority of the time.
So if push comes to shove, I'm assuming a judge is going to do something before tomorrow afternoon, but if that doesn't happen, do you still show up at the meeting tomorrow?
No, I'll be respectful of the fact that if there's, based on the new counsel that I've received from the county attorney, that what he had said on Friday, and we're all learning, so in graciousness, I think we're learning a little bit more about this process. So he had told me on Friday that writing my intention to appeal would stay the vacancy hearing, which it has, but would also stay the effect of Pat's action or ruling. And so now I'm understanding that that's not enough, that there actually has to be a legal filing in order to stay that and to appeal it, and to what I feel will be more due process, by which normally, and I spoke with Mr. Phillips about this, about due process, about the fact that normally you're given evidence and that you're able to respond to it. So for example, not knowing that it would be reported that there was 0 water usage, which is not true, and knowing that what was going to be presented as evidence, I would have had the head of the city water department come and speak and explain that a meter does not turn over, nor do they keep incremental data. In other words, you don't see a 0.25 or a 0.50. When you hit 748 gallons, it registers as 1. So I've had to explain to those who have said, you didn't turn on a faucet or you didn't flush a toilet. I mean, and the level of scrutiny now, and I just want people to consider this, any other voter in Woodbury County would anyone go through this level of scrutiny to say 13 to 25 gallons, that's not enough. Your 5 neighbors within 4 houses, we're going to dismiss all 5 because somebody 16 houses away, and I want everyone to understand this, that's down the block and over one street. To say that that individual contradicted the other 5, I'd like those 5 people to come to a court and to be able to speak and to say, why does the auditor not believe our testimony? In fact, in the ruling it said they were contradicted. They were not contradicted. He simply said he hadn't seen me. I would like to be able to respond to that in a court and to have someone who can present evidence and that there's due process to be able to respond to it. Again, had I known, Bob Scott told me that my water bills would not be released. They were. No other voter, and we've had 2 in 24 years, has gone through this level of scrutiny to be recording himself, which I will also be able to present. But to me, that's where it strikes me as incredulous, that this is just simply about voter registration. It's clearly not. There's something that is more than that, and by having this hearing first, became a sole entity deciding, and I think with what was presented, had I known that this is going to be presented, that I quote unquote lied to the VA, I would have brought my lender. And I would have had my lender explain that I made very clear my intentions, that I would continue to have as my primary residence and my property tax homestead exemption the home on Grandview. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know what was going to be presented. And so on the spot, they're asking, okay, now respond to your water usage. And I'd like to ask any of you, if you believe that if your voter registration was challenged and you had your neighbors within 3 houses testify that they see you there, and somebody a block and a half away, a single individual says, well, I don't see you in your home, that you are no longer able to vote. And for the voting, we talk about disenfranchisement and suppression, all of this, that it's to be made easy. I think that there's clearly something more than whether or not I'm registered to vote here. And I just want to make one last comment. Mr. Gill brought up other people, and he did so because he was learning the facts, which is completely appreciated, but he brought up previous registrants from my home. And I tried the best as I could to answer to the fact that we had rented our home previously before re-inhabiting it. I'm not responsible for the voter registration of anyone else, just as if you purchased a home and someone came to you and said, well, why is this person registered to vote in your home? That's not a citizen's job. That's the job of the auditor. If you know that there are individuals with a Hinton P.O. box or an inactive voter over in Dakota Dunes, that's not on any of us as citizens. So I'm speaking merely, in some ways as a citizen today, that I'm no longer able to vote at all. I've been given the option that I can vote over on the Christie Road residence, not where I keep my property tax homestead, not where I have my driver's license, not where I've demonstrated, and 5 individuals within 100 to 200 foot radius have also given their statements, notarized, that are all dismissed. They're either apparently not telling the truth or they're not credible. I believe that they need to be able to come and say, this is what I'm seeing, and I'd like to know why our 5 statements are dismissed for someone who doesn't live on the same block. That to me is concerning. And I think if any of you are in the same situation, you would wonder why that is as well. I want to be very clear. Those statements of lying to the VA or misleading the lender, I fully plan to answer and plan to call on witnesses. It's hard to do that when you're not presented, this is what's going to happen. And I think those due process concerns were made known to me by counsel as well. Other questions you may have?
Jeremy, do you understand that some people might be concerned with the fact that, you know, you say you're at this one residence, but your family, your wife, your kids are at the other? As
Absolutely.
Parents, people who are parents.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how could you say you're not staying where your family's staying?
Yeah, so there are times, and I think I've demonstrated that, where I have a child or two children with me over at the Grandview residence. There's times where we've stayed there as a family, and there's other times where I've come home from either military or the Congressional Campaign Trail. It's not typical, so I understand that, and I understand that it's something that people will say, well, your actions caused this. We have a family that has been anywhere from 8 to 13, and we spent many years looking for a place that would best accommodate our family. I understand that for some people, this isn't typical, but that's a private decision that we made that we felt was in the best interest of our family. I believed as a citizen that I had a right to make that decision. Is it fit into expectations? No, it doesn't. But if I'm actually doing that, and I'm actually staying there, and I've talked to other legislators who spend 4 nights a week. I just came from my military unit where many people spend time away. This is part of the service that I feel that I've been called to, and in order to balance both of those, it's a decision we made as a family. And I thought I had a right, and I thought we had a right as a family to be able to make that decision. When I went to legal counsel and I said, if you have 2 homes, which we have several elected officials who have, what will I need to do in order to be able to maintain my residency? I'm committed to serving in the district in which I was elected. I was told you must keep your property tax homestead. You need to keep your driver's license, you need to frequent and inhabit, and you need to meet the statute requirements. But if I'm told by someone, no, we're not going to allow you to do that, it doesn't matter the steps that you take. It doesn't matter even if, and the reason that I alluded to this when the auditor first brought it up, if certain individuals say, your family can't be residing in that home, it's too small. Who gets to decide that? Somebody gets to tell us that we can't live here or that I can't establish this residency. It would have been a whole lot easier, I guess, to have sold it or rented it, or to do what some others have done and hang an address on a parent's basement. I'm not going to do that. And so we've gone to great lengths to be able to continue to serve, and we've done so as a family. And I've alluded to the fact that, having people outside of the home or people put our family all over social media in those ways, I'm going to try to protect them as well. But it's a decision that we made as a family.
Jeremy, the Secretary of State office says that your canceled voter registration does not affect your congressional campaign. Where does your congressional campaign fall now as a priority to this, and are you continuing to campaign?
Yes, I have been, and right now I'm taking the time in order to make sure that I'm able to serve in the capacity for which I was elected, for which over 19,000 people put me in this position. And so right now, my focus obviously being here, and in the next few days, we'll be making sure that I can continue to serve in the supervisor capacity for which I was elected. By that, I am fully aware that there is at least one other campaign that is trying to use this. And this was alluded to in the document that Pat Gill gave me. I mean, it says you are running for Congress. The reason that I wanted to have that read, and it was not allowed to be read, is that it goes to motivation. It was alleged in there that I'm taking dark money. And I guess that's not a partisan or a motivational aspect of this, but it is. And I'm here to tell you, I have never taken dark money. If you look at my financial disclosures, there is one pack, it's from Siouxland Ethanol, But that's as much about this as anything, that this idea of me lying to the VA, taking dark money, and ascending a ladder for which I need to be taken down. I take personally, and I want to make sure that not only from an integrity standpoint, but also for my family, that I clear this record as well. Other questions? Thank you very much.
Mr. Taylor is lashing out due to his own deceptive actions. He has not been honest and transparent, and he's being cut. Mr. Taylor claims the process and hearing was political hat job. This is false. Politicians very often take this position when they have been called out for their own misbehavior. Two gentlemen obtained and presented key data on the mortgage statement and the water usage. Records are registered Republican and registered independent. Two gentlemen, Republicans, and I am independent. Mr. Taylor signed legal statement contained on the VA loan that 5202 Christie Road was his primary and principal residency. Was he lying to the VA loan in order to obtain that? Now he's saying that he doesn't live there. Mr. Taylor cannot have it both ways. Everybody knows Mr. Taylor is living off the taxpayers' dollars. And his gravy train is coming to the end of the line. Mr. Taylor should step down and to do the right thing. And he continues on and on and on. Drag everybody to court. So what he's gonna do? The VA will go after him because he lied to them. So you better stop, Mr. Taylor. Any other questions?
Maria, in filing these petitions, I guess, what's the original motivation for this then? Because you felt he didn't live in the district, or what has been the crux of this getting to where we're at today?
Well, getting where we are today, who is going to put his time, his money to go all through this? I have the guts to do it. And we know for a long time that he is a typical politician. Nobody going after him. So I'm going to do it, and I did it.
At some point, if there's a special election, do you live in that district? Would you seek that seat if it came to that? As you've run for office before.
Yes, well, right now, at this point, I'm busy with my husband that is going to have surgery, but I will rule that out. And since he's no longer there, somebody needs to be appointed to do the job with a dignity. So time will tell.
So you're
I
not
don't-
ruling it out that you would. Mr. Gill said that he'd be in favor of a special election instead of an appointment, but so you're not ruling out if there is a special election, you might seek the seat.
Correct. And I have copies of my statement.